Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Moonwise. This evening, we have a full moon, and this full moon is really tapping into a lot of very intense planetary energy. And joining me today to talk about this full moon and to also talk about the election and some things coming up related to the election is astrologer Daniel Fiverson. Welcome back to Moonwise, Daniel.
Thank you, Merrylin. It's wonderful always to be here.
Well, it's always great to have you here. And talking about this full moon tonight in the sign of Aries, opposite the sun in Libra, conjoined to the planet Uranus. You have talked a lot about Uranus and another planet out there, Aries. Eris. I know Aries. It's in the sign of Aries, but Eris. Get these straight. Okay. So how do you see this full moon? I talked about it a couple weeks ago, so you can start out.
How do I see
this full moon?
Oh, the full moon. Well, it's certainly intense. I mean, you have described some of the dynamics that are undergoing. You know, we don't have to be astrologers. We don't even have to, have any kind of intuitive understanding. If we just see what's going on in our world, in our lives, we get a sense of it, and it correlates exactly. Eris was the uninvited guest, and how many of us have had something uninvited show up in our world recently? This is the type of energy that's out there. It's been active really for the past year or so, and we're passing through the retrograde period of it. The retrograde conjunction was only a couple of weeks ago. When planets meet up, they often conjoin 3 times. They conjoin the first time, moving direct in a forward motion. Then one of them or both of them will back up, and so they'll conjoin again.
And you're talking about conjoining the planet Uranus.
Right, conjoining Uranus, and so right now they're both moving backwards, and the retrograde periods can add a whole other layer of intensity to the dynamics that are happening. Uranus is the awakener. Uranus shows up and will awaken whatever within us, something that within us that is asleep, and that we have not, in essence, been able to wake up consciously. It comes as inspiration, perhaps, or it comes as a shock or some sudden event. But the intention of the event isn't to knock us back down and go into a deeper sleep. It's to awaken us, to see what it was that it touched upon that perhaps was traumatic, because Uranus can be trauma, and to wake up to it and to heal it. And Eris. Eris, it's interesting. We've only seen Eris in the sky for the past 10 years. So, there's some astrologers who say we're not even ready to correlate what it's about. But, I've done some research, and others have, and it shows up prominently in the charts of people who have done something that was a significant radical departure for the world that they lived in, the society they lived in. Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Teresa of Avila, all good examples of people who had a prominent Uranus Eris in Aries dynamic in their chart.
Well, when I put what you're saying together with how I'm looking at this whole lunation that started a couple weeks ago in the sign of Libra, with a theme of looking at how we display those what we might consider the best in us, or that aesthetic talent that we have, that artistic or creative talent that each of us has in our own unique way. This tells me that this full moon, along with its revelations about that, and at the time I'd said, revelations that have to do with how we're able to bring into being, or into our awareness level, the ways in which we actually manifest what we imagine in our minds would be our aesthetic taste. Mm-hmm. And so with Eris and Uranus, with this full moon, it's like awakening that strong possibility of actually being able to bring into manifestation those ideals that we dream about and dream about being. And I'm thinking now of the mythology of Uranus that has to do with his rejecting his children, his creativity actually, because it didn't meet his ideal pictures. And so here, what with me, the full moon is always about our own consciousness, our personal consciousness, and what in us holds us back from having the kind of vision that we really want in our lives to manifest. And maybe it's about tweaking those inner images. I don't know. I mean, I'll know for myself personally, but I don't know for everybody else.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Uranus is our individuality. It's that innate creativity that makes us different from everybody else, on top of the core, sameness that we all have below the surface. But Aries and Libra is about self and others, and it's about how we're expressing what our needs are, balancing that with the needs of the other people in our lives, and it's about our relationships. So,
and full moons are always about relationship, whether it's a personal and inner relationship or outer relationship.
Right, because the full moon is actually the template of an Aries-Libra opposition. It's that 180-degree two opposing forces. But it's in that tension, it's in that 180-degree tension as they're pulling apart and then being drawn back together again, that the magic occurs, if you would. There's something in that moment that catalyzes the dynamic and actually transforms it into the phenomenon that you're creating. It becomes a phenomenon rather than just some idea or the seed, intention. It actually manifests the way that you said. That's what happens at the full moon. But we're dealing with with Uranus in Aries. What we have seen is radical self-entitlement, and we see it in politics. We see it on the road. We see it in our day-to-day transactions with other people. And Aries is feeding that dynamic. It's adding that quirkiness, that rogue kind of nature that says, I don't care what anybody else thinks of right and wrong, or what I should do or shouldn't do. I'm going to do what I quote need to do.
Okay, I wonder what'll be revealed this weekend on a national scene. I won't go there right at the moment, but Aries, the sign of Aries, is associated or said to be ruled by Mars. And Mars right now is in the sign of Capricorn, coming up this week to conjoin the planet Pluto.
Right.
And they're not exactly at the same degrees that this full moon and the sun are at, but they're approaching, or what we say in astrology is applying. They're approaching that, and so they're setting up what we call a T-square, because Capricorn is a sign that typically is square to Libra, where the sun is, and Aries, where the moon is.
Right.
And how do you see that dynamic playing out with this full moon?
Well, again, it adds some more. What's the word? I don't want to keep saying intensity because I'm wearing that word out. But it's balsamic. Pluto, it takes 248 years to circle the sun. Mars takes 2 years. So Mars is moving much, much faster. Mars is closing the cycle. It's balsamic. And in this balsamic phase, balsamic conjunction,
the Mars and the Pluto.
Mars and Pluto.
Right.
Yeah. It's when one cycle ends or is ending, all of the loose ends, all of the things that have been hanging fire, the issues that haven't been resolved come up, because those issues must be completed. There must be completion and closure on them before the new cycle can begin. So it adds that kind of tension. We will see things. Mars and Pluto have a very direct relationship to each other. Pluto is our unconscious desires. It's what the soul is desiring on its deepest level. It's what has motivated the soul to incarnate in the first place and what it wants to achieve. Mars is often called the lower octave of Pluto. What does that mean? Pluto says jump and Mars says how high. because Pluto becomes our conscious desires. It becomes how we are actually self-actualizing those Plutonian desires of the soul. So it's the choices that we make, and it's about the conscious choices that we're choosing consciously. And as this cycle closes and the new one begins, there's going to be circumstances, situations where we're going to be confronted, Pluto, with the choices that we have been making, and to really examine them. Pluto in Capricorn is radical reconstruction. We're going to be asked to really examine what we're choosing, what our priorities are, and to make some different choices.
And on a personal level, that would be in the area of your chart that has to do with where Capricorn is located. It depends, and of course, on what we call the house system. Does it have to do with your income? Does it have to do with your shared resources with other people? Does it have to do with your home, or does it have to do with your public work, the stuff that you do on a daily basis, or just in general how you serve your greater community? For each of us, it's a little different, but this was a 2-year cycle. And so, where have you been putting the energy that your soul has been kind of bringing up for you? Where have you been putting it? And to put it in your terms, we're having to come to terms with that, because we're going to, if you re-examine where you've been putting that drive to follow some deep soul desire, you may want to tweak that in the coming days.
And Mars is also courage. Mars brings with it the courage to make those changes and to make different choices.
Exactly. So you're listening to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Daniel Fiverson, my guest. We've been talking about the full moon tonight. And when we come back after the Moon Minute, we're going to shift gears and get into some of the election energy. Stay with us. Here's the Moon Minute. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin LeBlanc. You're listening to us on KSFR 101.1 or streaming on the web at ksfr.org. My guest today is Daniel Fiverson. We talked a little bit about that full moon, and I couldn't help but think about the aesthetic part and how we've seen the opposite of good taste in the election that's going on. And this is what the election is, what Daniel and I are going to talk about now, some aspects of it, because in 2 weeks from today, on October 29th, Saturday, here at the Community College in the Hemez Rooms, 4 astrologers, Daniel Fiverson, Jason Hawley, Michael Bartlett, and Marcia Stark will be putting on an event entitled America, the Election, and Beyond. And the focus of that event is primarily about what the heck is going on in this country. And today, we're not going to talk so much about what the heck is going on in this country as we are going to talk a little bit about the 2 major candidates. But you can attend that event. It's sponsored by KSFR by either getting a ticket in advance. You can call 428-1527. Leave a message. If no one answers, you'll get called back. 428-1527. And for for $20 in advance or $25 at the door, you may attend this event at 2 p.m. Saturday, October 29th, right?
Yes.
Do you want to say anything more about the event before we get into...
Just that, there are many astrologers who work with a predictive methodology. As an evolutionary astrologer, it's not so much my focus. I think that it's wonderful that astrology can be descriptive, but I think it's more important to understand the whats. We know to understand the whys. We all know the whats, but I like to look at the whys behind it, to have the understanding of it. And not to necessarily make predictions. So I'm just saying this kind of as a disclaimer, because we're not going to do anything predictive and saying this person's going to win or that person's going to win.
I would say that most Western astrologers aren't into predictive, basically because I think there's a recognition that until we truly know ourselves and the complexities of the people and that we interact with, that it's very difficult to actually point out things. And then there is this issue of free will versus fate, and nobody has had a really clear definition of that, or found a way to get around that. And I'll go into the idea of prediction with the idea of psychics even recognizing something in that realm of channelers and psychics. If somebody is accurate 80% of the time, they're considered good.
Right.
Because, we're all, each of us individually are interpreting things from our own perspective. And therein lies some limitations because none of us has the full picture.
Right.
And so many astrologers in the West, especially what we call typically Western astrology as versus Eastern or Vedic or whatever, actually recognize this dynamic and just sort of stay away from it because knowing the future doesn't deal with how we live the present. It basically comes down to that. So having said all of that, we only have 10 minutes left to talk about this. Daniel and I have both the United States chart and charts of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in front of us, the two major candidates, and their charts aren't necessarily accurate because nobody has an actual birth certificate to go on by these two individuals, but we still know a lot of things about them. And one of the things I like to do when I'm looking at a comparison of this sort is to just start out with the sun and where it is. Now, I have to say, though, that Daniel uses a different chart than I do. He uses what we call a Gemini rising. It's the same date, but a different time of day. And I'm using a Sagittarius rising. And just from that perspective alone, we might say things. Trump is a Gemini. Hillary is a Scorpio.
We think she's a Scorpio, right?
Well,
she gives that.
I'm pretty sure
she's
she's a Scorpio.
Well,
Sun.
She's given two times of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. and she has never really said.
But it's still Scorpio Sun.
It's Scorpio Sun, yeah. But
Yes.
But in the 8 p.m. she's also Scorpio rising.
Right.
So
Yes,
that kind of
that even
doubles it down.
intensifies the Scorpio energy. Right.
We obviously we should expect that when we look at a presidential candidate, there are going to be correlations between the chart and the United States chart.
There should be. Otherwise, they don't belong.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win or lose. It means that they're having an impact upon the time in which they live, and that they are having a certain influence on the national psyche, the national personality, the national behavior in one way or another. So the aspects don't necessarily detail whether or not they're the winner or the loser.
Right. Yeah. So basically, I'm going to point out something just from the perspective of the Scorpio sun of Hillary, that her sun impacts the area of the United States chart that has to do with the populace in general, and the humanitarian issues, and what we've seen in her record as a political figure is that she has cared for the underdog. She has cared for children. And Scorpio, on its highest expression, is looking to improve matters, to make things better than they are. On its low end matter, it doesn't, care so much about others as it does about self, and that's where ego gets in the way. And then it wants to just make sure that it's that the Scorpio is taken care of first and foremost. And so what we don't know is, we see variations of this in Hillary, in the dynamic, where she seems to be in bed somewhat with the banking industry, and is that really to self-aggrandize herself? and yet she does have these caring issues for humanity. And maybe she's trying to work out a way of working together with the moneyed people to be able to help. And that's like gets into the Clinton Foundation, to help people who are hungry and need health care, et cetera. That's one way in which I see Hillary's impact in the United States.
Yeah. Her sun in Scorpio relative to her Pluto in Leo, there's a mutual reception. They're in each other's signs. Hillary, in Hillary's chart, she's about her own self-empowerment as a woman. And that 11th house placement in the U.S. chart is, the 11th house is Aquarius's house. It's the house of revolution. We talked about the awakening of Uranus, which rules Aquarius. So the way that she is impacting the U.S. chart is she's bringing this self-empowerment as a woman to the stage, to the U.S. political stage, and she's literally changing the politics. She's presenting the potential for a woman to actually be president of the United States. It's huge. If you look at her own personal history, she was the first woman valedictorian of her class at Vassar. She was the first lady to be elected to the Senate and become Secretary of State. And she has set her crosshairs to be president, first woman president of the United States. This is her sole intention, is to establish that ascendancy of women on the stage, on the broad range of the U.S. political scene.
I'd love to say more about her, but I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to say much about Trump looking at the time.
Okay.
So we have Trump's Gemini sun, and let's look at it from the perspective of the Gemini rising chart that you have. What does that say to you, Daniel?
Well, Donald's son. First of all, Donald was born under an eclipse. He was born under a lunar eclipse in Gemini. So we know that Donald is very much about expressing his ideas and his beliefs and his own ethical sense of right and wrong, which has certainly pushed all of our buttons and our boundaries, if not his own. Falling out in the first house, this is what the world is seeing of us. The world is seeing our underbelly, our soft underbelly, our shadow is being exposed by Donald on the public stage. There's no question. He's kind of out there as our spokesman, if you would, or the image that the world has of our country, and it. From a lot of perspectives, it's not necessarily a pleasant picture.
And it's almost like he wants to identify. He wants us to see him as the country.
Right.
It's Donald's world.
Right.
It's not our world. It's his world.
It's the world according to Donald, the U.S. according to Donald. And so it's really they both have touched the U.S. Neptune. They both have Neptune in very near the U.S. Neptune. Whether it's a conjunction, I think it's a conjunction.
Neptune very close
and Saturn,
to the Saturn,
and
U.S. Saturn.
Well, it's also in a new phase to the U.S. Neptune as well. It may not be conjunct, but it's
Right.
it's within 30 degrees. So there's a phase relationship between every two planets in the chart, whether they're by an aspect or not. So they both have touched that zeitgeist, that collective unconscious, the unrest, the discontent, the unhappiness. Sometimes
but most people in their generation, which is a good number of people still here on the baby boomers, have that same thing. And so this is where we're all kind of like, how are they expressing it? This is where your own kind of sense of the zeitgeist is touching their sense, one more so than the other.
They both have planets in the U.S. First house and in the Gemini rising chart. Actually, they both have planets that are near or conjunct to the U.S. Mars Uranus. And so there is this unresolved anger. There's a resentment. There is a deep-seated discontent that's happening, a need for awakening, a need for revolution, change, Uranus. And they have both spoken to it. They've both awakened it. I kind of get the sense, because not everybody who I've encountered who's supporting Trump, whether I agree with their beliefs or not, is necessarily uneducated, or I kind of sense that there's an anger quotient here somehow, that the angrier somebody is with what's going on, the closer they are in the polarity towards Trump than Clinton.
It's interesting, and that kind of ties into that zeitgeist sense that you were addressing. And there's indications in both of their charts that they are pretty much hawkish, warmongers. And we've heard that in their speeches to a certain extent, or in their behavior in the case of Hillary's, in terms of policies that she's been behind as Secretary of State. We're just about out of time here, folks, and our atomic clock just went berserk on us. We just have a little over a minute left to say. What do you want to just say something really quick about this?
I just want to encourage everybody to come out in 2 weeks, because it's going to be a great talk. I've got two colleagues who I have tremendous respect for. They have an amazing amount of knowledge contained within them. They're going to share it with us. I'm looking forward to learning from both of them. I think we all can. And it's really important to understand why we're going through this, because I do believe that it's all good. I believe we're headed towards something much greater than what we have, but it's still a rocky road. Nobody has promised us a comfortable passage, but we are guaranteed a safe landing. And if you come out in 2 weeks and find out about how this is unfolding.
All right. And we'll have Jason Hawley with us next week to talk some more about the event as well, and the election in America, and not so much what's going on with the event on the 29th, but just in general. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to support us, 428 1527 today. Okay, take care.